publisher of Kings County Politics, is from a journalistic point of view, first of all, I think you have to keep your eye on the ball. And the eye on the ball meaning that Trump did pass it off to Congress, so I think it's very important from a journalistic point of view to reach out to Senator Schumer, who's very good legislatively, and ask him, where are you? Can this be done in 6 months? Then, since there's 5 Brooklyn Congress people, I would definitely reach out to Donovan first, because he's in the Republican majority, and say, have you spoken to Speaker Ryan? Is there bills happening? I would reach out to Congress people, Nydia Velazquez and Yvette Clarke and Jerry Nadler and Hakeem Jeffries, and I would, as a journalist, I would try to pin them down. It's like, can this happen in 6 months? What are you doing? What bills are out there? Have you reached across the aisle? Is it possible to reach across the aisle? It's been going on since 2001. Is there possible legislation that can be done? I think as a journalist, I believe you always kind of have to keep your eye on the ball and move the issue forward rather than get into the rhetoric on the city level. I do agree with my colleague here on the city level. I suppose, you know, the mayor, you want to make sure that the police are in line with your policies, to not get down on immigrants, you know, to do as much as you can to protect the immigrants you have. But I also think even the mayor, I think it's incumbent on the city council to put it in Congress's court. That's where it is right now.
Okay, so I think that when writing about immigration and about immigrants in particular, I think one of the most important things that you can do, no matter what it is, what angle you're taking, is to make it very clear what we have to lose. So much of what we're proud of here in New York City, I mean, whether it's our entrepreneurship, our vibrant neighborhoods, the growth in our population, just about everything that we're proud of here in New York City has been made possible because of immigrants. Immigrants have a higher rate of entrepreneurship across the city. Many neighborhoods across the city that you wouldn't associate with economic development. I mean, it's usually when you think about economic development in New York City, you think about big glass towers on the Williamsburg waterfront, or new investments in new corporate towers in Hudson Yards. But really in neighborhoods from Flushing to Sunset Park, what you're really seeing is immigrants that have started businesses and revived commercial corridors that were once moribund if you go back 20 or 30 years. This is the real power that immigrants have. Immigrants are 36% of the population, but 47% of all workers in the city. Basically, I mean, it's like immigrants are what has made New York great again. Quite simply. So we should never lose that sight when we're writing about this. In terms of what we can do to protect immigrants here, it's true that the federal government has most of the cards. I mean, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean that the city's powerless. Starting with, I mean, what David said, I completely agree that it's very important to deliver that message that immigrants are welcome here. And there's a very important reason for that. I mean, it's not just symbolic. All these decisions, from DACA to the Washington's general stance around immigration, really have the danger of destabilizing immigrant communities. And by destabilizing, that means people are less likely to invest in their own businesses because they may not be here next year. People are less likely to do well in school because what's the point? You will never achieve the American dream. These seem like small things, but when you think about it at the level of the individual family, the kind of fear of knowing that you may not be here next year, and also not knowing what your rights are, that's something that's hugely destabilizing to neighborhoods. So it's no small thing to say that our government needs to be very, very clear that immigrants are welcome here. On a more sort of concrete, sort of media level, we need to make sure that legal services agencies are working in every neighborhood in the city and in every ethnic community in the city. Because right now, we were just talking about ID NYC a little while ago. We finally reached, after so many years, this level of trust with immigrant communities where they can finally go into a government office, give their information, and get an ID. This is a level of trust that was no small feat to achieve. And now we're in danger of reversing all of that integration of immigrants into New York City just because of the current situation in Washington. So that really means two things. First, we have to make sure that people know what their rights are so that they're not in a position where they don't know what's going to happen next year. And second, we really need to look at what kind of data are we collecting about immigration status. And the current battle over the data collected by NYCID is a big one. But also, what kind of data is collected by schools, by other city agencies around immigration that could possibly be a target? And this is something that we really, as a researcher, I never like to say that we shouldn't be collecting data, because goodness knows that I love data and this is, forms the basis of my work. But at the same time, we need to be very careful right now because immigrant communities are under siege.
And I'll just briefly synthesize some of the things that have already been said, but as the local media, I think that for you all, much of your job is to introduce certain topics to communities, right? Or explain topics that are already in people's communities, or in some ways present solutions for some of the issues that have been raised. And so in many ways, I see journalists as educators. I mean, there's a reason why when dictators come to power, they essentially imprison educators and journalists, full stop. So when you all are writing your columns, I think that you all should really think about how you can present certain ideas to varying levels of folks who have varying levels of understanding as to what the issue may be. There are many communities that all they're doing is thinking about their IDs, sanctuary cities, whether or not they have to live in the shadows. We've seen this happen in cities. Kids aren't going to school, women aren't going to the police to report domestic violence, people aren't going to the hospital when they have a toothache or a stomachache, right? Certain communities know that, so you're providing them with information to solve that problem. Other communities may not even be thinking about that, right? So I wrote a book called Black Ethnics. It looks at Caribbeans and Africans and Black Americans. I'm on the board of BAJI, which is the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. A lot of people, when we think about immigration, oftentimes it's about Latin America, right? But the immigration, when I think about immigration, I think about Caribbean and Africa. So for some of you, you might be introducing this concept of, when we think about undocumented people or people who, need the social safety net or need protection from the government or whatever, or from the government, by the government, whichever angle we're looking at, you can shift the lens ever so slightly and educate a new population of people so that they can think beyond just Latin America into other countries. Let's see, I think your job can also be to highlight organizations and resources. So they're going to be either legal services or nonprofits that are doing this work to work on the immigration issue. But there are a lot of people, especially in local media, who may not know that some of these organizations exist, right? So in your stories, I think that you can highlight some of the work without promoting it. I mean, you're not getting paid to sort of work for another organization, but you really can introduce some of the resources that can go to this community. And I agree with David, symbolism does matter. It has to move beyond policy. I believe de Blasio made that speech right after Trump was elected, because a lot of people were thinking about moving into the shadows or moving out of New York, right? Not knowing where they should go and what they should do. And so if you're writing a piece, you can highlight the website that the mayor just put out about all the questions about DACA and all the resources that are there, and then add more. And then lastly, I'll just say, which I don't think this has been said, but actually talk to some immigrants when you're writing these stories. It's not just about federal and local policy, it's actually about the human stories that are connected to these issues that can really pull people in and help them understand just exactly who's affected. So.
Well, I mean, the point is really well taken, I think, about legal services. Because, I mean, a perennial story I know a lot of people write about are the vultures that try and take advantage of people's anxieties and, basically rip them off, overcharge them, underdeliver,
right.
Let critical deadlines go by, and then people are in a worse situation than if they had just stayed home and did nothing.
Can I just pick up on that a little bit more? I mean, I feel like I sort of started this off on the negative, like what the city shouldn't do, and I just I would say I think there's also something positive about the idea that the mayor really could articulate what should the relationship between the police and their local populations be, and how do you make crime fighting and even terrorism fighting something about having positive relationships with your local communities. I think that's a model that's much needed. New York can be okay at that when it tries, can be really horrible at that when it doesn't. And I think, and I would say Mayor de Blasio maybe has been on both sides of that at various times. I think that's an important issue to me for this race. And I would say, I think the question, what Christian was alluding to it with IDNYC, I think the idea that this was a part of the battle when IDNYC was first instituted some years ago. The New York Civil Liberties Union, which was very much in favor of having the ID, was very concerned about this question of what are you going to do with the data that you collect, and ultimately opposed at that time the idea of doing ID reluctantly, I think, because they felt like it was a dangerous thing to have all of that data there. It was, I would say, one of the more shocking moments in politics to me to see Assemblywoman Maritakis say that, sue the city for retaining that data. For what purpose could be imaginable at that moment, other than that we have the names and addresses and information about a number of undocumented people here? I think it's exactly to the point a number of you were making. It's both literally, immediately a fear to a lot of people and a threat, but also what does that do to the environment in the community? And what does that do in places? And I think there's a lot of overlap, as you're saying, I think, between the concerns of undocumented immigrants, of immigrants who are not undocumented, of African Americans, of people in the city who have lots of reasons to be concerned about what the police know about them and how they're going to use it.
Okay. Let's. I want to talk about something that I know is on everybody's mind, and anybody who's covering any of the races this fall. Housing, affordable housing. Right? Every candidate promises to support affordable housing. Very few apply actual numbers to specific policies and proposals. Just recently, I was moderating one of the debates up in Harlem, and I asked, I think there were about 9 candidates up there, and I asked what I consider a very specific, simple, and important question, which is, how are you defining affordable housing? There are a lot of different measures that are out there. There's the area median income, where the area is defined as the New York metro region. You get one number. You can define it as just the 5 boroughs. You get another number, slightly lower. You can define it as the community board where a particular project is, and you get yet another number. So I think that this is something that's really important, and I've actually even suggested to people, only half jokingly, that we stop using the term affordable housing. For one thing, I like workforce housing or something else that's a little bit more dynamic and a little more accurate, but affordable has been drained of a lot of its meaning, and yet it's arguably the #1 issue on the agenda for the election. What's affordable? What's affordable? Yeah, look at you.
What's affordable in New York?
I mean, everybody.
Yeah, I mean, so of course, what you're talking about is of course a big problem. How do you not only have enough? I mean, how do you not only have affordable housing, but make the subsidies go down deep enough that it is affordable to people who really need it? I mean, I think there's a technical question of the kind that you're talking about, but there's, I think, just the commitment to, are you really, you're really interested in making a place for people who are just getting started, who are on the lower end of the spectrum. And I think the city has been very weak at that, and it's gotten worse. I will say one thing that maybe you can see as a test of it's not just about are you going to put money into this, or do you have a clever new idea. I think a lot of it is, how much are you willing to demand from developers? Because the story about affordable housing is very different in Detroit or in Buffalo, where you have softer housing markets, let's say. In a place where the housing market is so hot that you have a lot of developers who want to do a lot of development, if you put requirements on them, they will make it affordable as part of what they do. And I think their question is, are you willing to push that and ask them to really do it?
I think from a journalistic point of view, just from our local coverage, one of the more interesting issues that we cover when it comes to affordable housing is illegal conversions in Sunset Park and Bay Ridge, because the Asian and Chinese American community has no representation, and there are thousands in Sunset Park, and they need affordable housing, and a lot of Chinese are buying up the old housing. It was traditionally an Italian neighborhood, and they're doing illegal conversions. And at the same time, everybody's saying, oh, it's very unsafe, and it is unsafe. But I don't think a lot of the Asian people that live in these converted housing really want to be there. But there's no affordable housing. And then when you talk to the people and you say, hey, we're having, our Asian population is exploding. there's thousands of Asians here, and they need affordable housing. And the people in the community, the city, nobody's really looking at that. I think when you're a reporter, I think there's two kinds of stories that you cover, and they're both very valid. There's what I